Okay, our next demonstration is going to show you the different parts to the radial arm saw. We're also going to talk about the chop saw or the miter saw. All right, so this is the radial arm saw. You have an arm, overhead arm that comes out, and you have the saw that kind of glides back and forth. This particular saw has a pretty strong cable and string to kind of help to pull it back. You have a fence. Your work will always get pushed back up against that fence, so you do have to have a straight edge on your board, okay? It's a good idea to have a flat surface down against the table and a straight edge back against the fence. If there's any crown in your board, or in other words, you have a warp in this direction, that can cause the kerf or the slot that the saw blade is creating to close on your saw blade and bind up. And that's where kickback starts and happens, okay? So it's always a good idea to pay attention to this straight edge and make sure that that's nice and tight against the fence, okay? If there's any crown on there, you need to pay attention to that because that can catch you off guard sometimes, okay? You have your on-off switch right here on the end of the arm. You also have a lever down below that you can use to raise and lower the saw, okay? So if you ever was in a situation where you wanted to basically not cut all the way through, but just cut a dado or cut a groove but across the grain, but not all the way through the board, then you could raise the saw up and you could use this machine to do that, okay? There's lots of different ways to do everything. That's one of the things that you're going to learn in this class is if you want to make a dado, well, first you got to decide, do I want to do it on the radial arm saw? Do I want to do it on the table saw? I could use a router too. So there's just lots of different ways of doing things, okay? Some ways, though, are safer than others, and so I have my preferences as far as what I'm going to go to if I need to do a crosscut, for example. This machine and the miter gauge, or the miter saw, the next one I'm going to show you, are my two tools of choice for cross-cutting, okay? All right. A couple of safety rules before we start. Number one, always maintain a 6-inch margin of safety on this machine. This machine has a 7.5 horsepower motor, and it wants to climb up on your board. And so I always keep my hands back, and I always keep my hands out of line of the direction that the blade is going, okay? So always stay clear of the blade that way, okay? We only use it for cross-cutting, and we make sure that we securely hold the board back against the table or the fence. And those are kind of the main rules, okay? If you can follow those rules, you're going to be okay, all right? I remember growing up when I was in an industrial tech class back in high school, we had a smaller machine than this one, and Jim Plants was our teacher, and we would frequently have students that were trying to rush it. They were going too fast, and that saw would all of a sudden climb up on the board and didn't want to run, okay? And you would hear it just kind of stall out, and Jim Plants, my teacher, he would scream across the room and yell at these students to turn the saw off. And so if that was ever to happen to you, just remember, turn the saw off quickly, okay? You don't want to let it try and you don't want to just freeze and do nothing, because what can happen is the motor windings can arc across and you can damage a motor that way, all right? So let's do a quick demo. When you're ready to turn it on, go ahead and push the green button, let the saw come up to full speed, and then go ahead and you can get your board lined up. Hold it tight up against the fence with your left hand. I'm going to hold the saw with my right hand. I'm going to keep my hands parallel always. Here we go. Once I've got it ready, we're going to go ahead and make my cut. Make another cut. Okay, so this is a great saw to have if you're cross-cutting narrow or small boards like this. But really, when this saw comes in real handy is when you're cutting raised panels like this, and you've got panels that are 16 inches wide, okay? That's a pain in the butt to try and cut on a miter saw, even if it's a sliding miter saw. So having a saw like this that can cut out, this particular saw cuts about 24 inches. So it'll cut a 24-inch wide panel. And so this is a nice machine, all right? All right, so that's the radial arm saw. Let me just tell you, last thing, this saw does have the functionality. You can pull this out and you can lock it on the rail like this. And you can, let's see here. So it's not going to move on us, and you can swivel it, okay? So if I was at the lumber yard and all they had was a radial arm saw, and I asked them if they'd be willing to rip a board, you might see them do that. And so one thing that you're going to want to, for me, I would never do this here because we have table saws, and if I've got ripping to do, that's going to be my tool of choice. But if you're in a pinch, you can swivel that blade, and as long as you're feeding the material against the rotation of the blade, in other words, the blade is pushing against it, you'll be okay. I've heard stories about people who got into a hurry and they accidentally fed it the wrong way, and that saw just took that board and it sent it right through the wall of the machine of the lumber yard. And so just keep in mind that that is an option if you ever need it, but for the most part, that's useless information here in this class because we're not going to be doing any of that. All right? All right. The next machine I wanted to show you is my go-to machine of choice if I'm doing any, oh, wrong way, if I'm doing any cross-cutting, and that is the sliding miter saw. All right? The sliding miter saw is it's a lot safer than the radial arm saw because it has this chopping action, okay? Otherwise, it works the same way. You've got a fence. You also have, and are very easy to make adjustments so you can cut angles. If your saw can cut not only this angle, but also you can adjust this angle, then that's known as a compound miter saw, okay? So that's a nice feature, okay? And so yeah, this is a good machine. This is our depth or our stop block, and this is used if you have multiple parts that you want to cut to the same length without having to measure each one. So that's really good if you've got a lot of parts to cut. Otherwise, let me show you how to use this machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut a board that's about 12 inches long. All right, our margin of safety on this particular machine is 4 inches. All right, so we don't want to get within 4 inches of the blade. All right, so in other words, we keep our hands back. All right, so let's say, for example, I want to cut on this. I always put an X on the scrap side of the line, okay? You need to get into the habit of doing everything that's going to yield your best quality cut and work, okay? So when I make a line, I don't know if you can see that, but there should be a little pigeon toe or an arrow. Okay, I'm going to cut right in the middle of that arrow, and I'm going to cut with the saw blade on the scrap side of that. Okay, so I got to cut on the right side of the line. All right, so we'll get this in here. We're going to line up our saw blade, and when I'm ready to make my cut, I'm going to come down and I'm going to pull out. Okay, so here we go. And the reason why I pull out is that's just good practice. Sometimes your board is just a little bit wider than your saw blade is wide, and so you'll leave a little extra material, and so just come out and then you don't have that issue, okay? So here's a nice piece of wood here in the garbage. This is a little bit wider. So again, here, we're gonna come down and out. Bada bing, bada boom. That's the radial arm saw. If I need to cut at an angle, There's a 45-degree angle. Again, you need to keep that 4-inch margin of safety. If I needed to get really close, I could always come over here. If I come over here and hold it on the right side of the saw, I'm going to hold this, I'm going to operate the saw with my left hand. So you got to be able to switch. Okay. And so here we go. Pull it down and then out. And so now you can cut 45-degree angles that way. Okay. So yeah, that's the sliding miter saw. This is a nice feature. You can basically put it at any angle, even if there's a spring-loaded stop that will, I guess, catch it at the more frequent angles. So there's one at 22.5, there's one at 45 and 30 degrees. But really, if you can cut at any angle that you want, and then just screw this in. This is just going to hold it in place so that it doesn't move. Okay, but that's I think all I wanted to share with that. One thing I did want to show you, let's say for example, you've got a stop, you've got multiple parts that you're wanting to cut. Okay, use a stop. All right, set it up, measure it. We're going to go ahead and cut multiple parts. Notice how I'm holding it on the left side, so the piece that's between the stop and the blade. Okay, again, remember, kickback happens when parts bind up with the blade. You want to make sure that you're able to hold that part and support that part that's stuck in between the two, you know, the fence, the stop, or the blade. Okay, here we go. And 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, and I think that's it. Let me know if you have questions.